If the whole world attacked the US, how long could it hold out? This is the ultimate hypothetical war, a scenario where the planet's combined military and economic might is thrown at a single superpower. Today, we're not just asking if the United States could survive, but for how long. We'll explore whether America's legendary military, its massive economy, and its geographic isolation could actually withstand the ultimate siege. Now, to analyze this, we need some ground rules. First, this is a conventional war only. Nuclear weapons are off the table. The moment a nuke flies, this analysis, and probably the world, is over. Second, for the sake of the scenario, we have to assume the global coalition is politically united. All the historical, political, and ideological differences that divide nations, let's just say they've been put on hold for this one all-consuming mission. With the stage set, the question remains, when the whole world comes knocking, how long can the United States refuse to answer? Phase 1. The initial onslaught and geographical isolation. The first 24 hours would be a brutal awakening. The attack wouldn't start with an armada off the coast of California. It would begin with a synchronized global strike aimed at decapitating America's presence overseas. The United States maintains a massive global footprint, with around 750 military installations in more than 80 countries. These outposts, from Camp Humphreys in South Korea to Ramstein Air Base in Germany, are designed to project power outwards. But in this scenario, they instantly become liabilities, isolated islands in a world that has suddenly turned hostile. In Europe, the massive US presence would be swamped. Forces in Germany, Italy, and the UK would face the combined armies of an entire continent. Their supply lines would be severed in an instant. Their airfields would be targeted by overwhelming numbers of aircraft. And while these highly trained American units would inflict staggering casualties on their attackers, their fate would be sealed. Surrounded, outnumbered, and with zero hope of reinforcement, their eventual defeat would be a near certainty. At the same time, a similar catastrophe unfolds in the Asia-Pacific. The roughly 54,000 troops stationed in Japan and the 28,500 in South Korea would face the full might of China's People's Liberation Army, backed by other regional powers. Naval bases at Yokosuka and Sasebo would be blockaded and bombarded. Air bases like Kadena would be rendered useless. In the opening hours of the war, America's ability to project power across the globe would be utterly shattered. The loss of life and equipment would be immense. With its foreign legions neutralized, the continental United States would find itself strategically isolated for the first time in modern history. The nation becomes an island fortress with two enormous moats, the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. This geography, which has protected the US from foreign invasion for centuries, is now its single greatest defensive weapon. Any invasion force has to cross thousands of miles of open ocean, a logistical nightmare of epic proportions. The attacking coalition might have the numbers on paper, but getting those numbers to the fight is a completely different battle. Transporting millions of soldiers, their tanks, their supplies, and their fuel requires a colossal fleet of transport ships, a fleet that would be slow, incredibly vulnerable, and a perfect target for American defenders. As the initial shock wears off, the US would pivot from global power projection to continental defense. The approximately 1.33 million active duty personnel and nearly 766,000 reservists would mobilize for the defense of the homeland. The nation's defense budget, around $895 billion, would be focused on this one singular cause. The first phase of the war ends with the US bruised and cut off from the world. Its overseas forces are gone, but the homeland remains untouched. The great oceans are now the battlefield, and the world's navies are on their way. The real war is just beginning. Phase 2. The war at sea and in the air. As the coalition's invasion fleet steam across the Atlantic and Pacific, Phase 2 begins, a titanic struggle for control of the seas and skies. This is where the US military, a force designed for exactly this kind of fight, would unleash its full fury. The heart of American naval power is its fleet of 11 nuclear-powered supercarriers, more than every other nation on Earth combined. Each carrier is a floating fortress, a mobile airbase carrying over 75 aircraft and protected by a strike group of cruisers, destroyers, and submarines. These carrier strike groups are the most powerful naval formations in history. The invading armada, while huge, would face a serious challenge. China, with the world's largest navy at 370 to 400 ships, and Russia, with its powerful submarine force, would be the core of the attack. But just imagine trying to coordinate a multinational fleet using different technologies, languages, and doctrines. It would be a command and control nightmare. While the world's navies combined have more ships, the US Navy's fleet is built around larger, more advanced vessels, giving it a massive technological edge. Then there are the unseen predators of the deep. The US fields a silent service of about 68 submarines, all of which are nuclear-powered, giving them nearly unlimited range and endurance. They would be America's ace in the hole, hunting the coalition's high-value transport ships and their escorts. At the same time, a furious war would be raging in the skies. The US Air Force is the largest and most advanced on the planet, with an inventory of over 5,200 aircraft. This includes a fighter fleet of more than 1,600 jets, headlined by the F-22 Raptor, the world's premier air superiority fighter, and over 400 of the elusive F-35 stealth fighters. The USAF also has long-range strategic bombers like the B-2 Spirit and B-21 Raider, capable of striking targets from halfway around the world. The coalition's air forces would struggle to bring their full numbers to bear. Most of their aircraft simply lack the range to cross the oceans without aerial refueling, a capability where the US holds a massive advantage with its fleet of over 450 tankers. Stealth technology would be a game-changer. F-22s, F-35s, and B-2s would be tasked with slipping past enemy defenses to hit what matters most: command and control ships, aircraft carriers, and logistics. The goal wouldn't be to sink every single ship, but to cripple the invasion fleets, sow chaos, and break their command structure, forcing them to turn back. But this would be anything but a one-sided fight. The sheer number of missiles and aircraft the coalition could throw at the US would threaten to overwhelm even the most advanced defenses. The attrition rate would be horrific, ships would be lost, planes would be shot down, the cost would be immense. But for the first few months, the combination of America's technology, its carrier groups, and its submarine fleet would likely be enough to keep the invasion at bay. The oceans would become a graveyard, but the shores of the United States would remain secure. The question is, for how long? Phase 3, the economic and home front battle. While the military fights a desperate battle at sea, an equally important war would be waged on the home front. A global siege isn't just a military contest, it's a battle of industrial capacity, economic endurance, and pure national will. Cut off from global trade, the United States would have to rely entirely on itself. The first critical challenge is energy. A modern war machine runs on oil. Luckily, the United States is one of the world's top energy producers. Its own oil and natural gas would fuel its war machine and power its cities without foreign imports. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve, a massive emergency stockpile, would provide a buffer for months, if not years. Next up is food. Here again, the US holds a powerful advantage. It's one of the most food self-sufficient nations on the planet, a massive exporter of corn, wheat, and soybeans. In a crisis, that export capacity gets turned inward. You might not find avocados year-round, but the nation would be more than capable of feeding its population. The real test would be America's industrial base. The US would have to switch to a full war economy, something not seen since World War II. Car factories would start building tanks. Civilian manufacturing would shift to producing munitions, aircraft, and ships. The question isn't if it can be done, but how fast. The initial losses of military hardware would be staggering. Replacing destroyers and fighter jets requires an industrial effort of incredible scale. The US does have a huge arsenal in reserve, and that brings us to the ultimate nightmare, a successful land invasion. Even if a fraction of the coalition's invasion force broke through and established a beachhead, their problems would just be getting started. The United States is a vast country. Invading and occupying it would be a logistical impossibility. The sheer size of the territory, combined with a heavily armed civilian population, would turn any occupation into a bloody, never-ending insurgency. The old saying, "a rifle behind every blade of grass," would become a brutal reality. An invading force wouldn't just be fighting an army, they'd be fighting a nation of over 330 million people on their home turf. The cost in blood and treasure to subdue the continent would be astronomical, far more than the global coalition would likely be willing to pay. This fierce internal resistance, backed by a self-sufficient economy, is the third and maybe the strongest layer of American defense. Phase 4. The long game and probable outcome. After months, maybe even a year of brutal warfare, the conflict enters its final phase, the long game. The initial shock is over. The US survived the first wave, its military has bloodied the invasion fleets, and the home front has mobilized. The question now is about sustainability. Who can last the longest in a global war of exhaustion? For the United States, the situation would be grim. It's a nation under siege, constantly needing to replace lost ships, aircraft, and experienced crews. The Navy would be taking heavy losses. While it has a long-term goal to grow to 381 ships, the reality is that with a current fleet of about 300, its numbers would shrink as losses outpace production. The Air Force would be stretched to its breaking point. The economic and psychological strain would be severe. But the global coalition would be facing its own crisis. The political unity needed to start this war would be incredibly fragile. A war of this scale would wreck the global economy. How long could China, Russia, India, and the nations of Europe maintain their alliance when their own economies are collapsing and their people are protesting a bloody war thousands of miles away? Disagreements over strategy and unequal sharing of the burden would almost certainly begin to fracture the coalition. And that logistical tail, that chain of fuel tankers, ammo crates, and transport ships, is a massive vulnerability. Every single one would be a target for America's surviving submarines and long-range bombers. So what's the most likely outcome? Not a dramatic conquest, but a bloody, grinding stalemate. Militarily, the US could likely prevent a successful land invasion indefinitely. If the Navy and Air Force can cripple the invasion fleets in the first 6 to 12 months, the invasion probably fails before it ever truly begins. Economically, the US could sustain itself for years. The real choke point would be its ability to produce highly complex hardware, like stealth jets and advanced warships, fast enough to replace combat losses. Our best estimate, the United States could likely hold out for 2 to 5 years in a state of total war. In that time, it would inflict such devastating losses on the global coalition that the alliance, its political will and economic capacity, would crumble. The invasion would falter not on the beaches of America, but in the depths of the oceans and in the capital cities of the coalition. The world would be economically shattered, and the United States would be left a battered, isolated fortress. It would be a victory, but a victory that cost the world. Conclusion. So, could the United States survive an attack from the rest of the world? When you look past the overwhelming numbers and focus on the practical realities of geography, logistics, and technology, the picture changes. America's greatest defense has always been its location. The Atlantic and Pacific Oceans are the world's largest moats, making any invasion a logistical nightmare. That natural barrier is backed up by the most powerful navy and air force on the planet. Even if an enemy force made it ashore, they would face the impossible task of conquering a vast continent with a defiant, well-armed population, all while supplied by a vulnerable lifeline stretching thousands of miles across an ocean. Economically, America's self-sufficiency in food and energy would allow it to withstand a global siege for years. The conflict would become a brutal war of attrition, a test of which side's industrial base and political will breaks first. And given the inherent instability of a global military alliance, the odds are the coalition would fracture long before it could win. The United States wouldn't emerge unscathed. It would be a Pyrrhic victory, leaving the nation scarred, isolated, and forced to rebuild. But would it survive? Almost certainly, it could hold out. But what do you think? Could the US really withstand the entire world? What factor do you think would be the most critical? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into military hypotheticals.